All right. It's still June 12th, 2022. I just decided that I'm going to read another one today. We read Lawrence. Who are we going to read now? Ellis. I'm going to read Ellis. I wrote this one on February 1st of this year. Oh, I think it's the last one. I mean, I haven't read all of them, but it's the last one in the collection, right? Yeah, it is. February 3rd, I wrote the afterword. Anyway. Ellis. Ellis preferred mayo on his fries as opposed to ketchup. He flagged down the waitress to make his request. She rolled her eyes as she walked away from him through the crowded cafe. A tall woman squeezed behind Ellis's chair, swinging her purse over her shoulder as she headed for the door to leave. It hit Ellis in the back of the head as he attempted to take a bite of his burger, causing him to drop the messy sandwich in his lap. He tried to protest, but the woman only looked at him with disgust and kept going. When the waitress returned with a small dish of mayo, Ellis was trying to wipe a blob of ketchup from his belt. The waitress set the mayo on the table. "Do you need more napkins? What happened?" she asked, seeing the burger patty on the tile floor. Ellis looked up at the insensitive girl. "Some entitled bitch hit me in the back of the head with a giant bag and knocked my lunch out of my hands," Ellis replied. "Well, there's no need for such language," the girl said with a look of shock. Ellis stood up and balled his soiled napkin on the table. "Look, I can see you are busy, but I've been treated like trash since I walked in the door, and I'm not going to take any more, especially from some snot-nosed teenage mom who couldn't keep her legs crossed." Ellis spat. The waitress glanced down at the pin on her apron with a photo of her infant daughter that read, "Mummy's Little Angel." Usually the pin won her bigger tips with less effort. Her mouth fell open as Ellis continued. "I haven't been rude to you until this point. You just save your bullshit indignation for when you whine to your grandma or whoever you live with who allowed you to become the giant suck in society that you are. I just came in here for lunch, not to be abused by a herd of self-absorbed cows." A fry cook was watching from the kitchen window, and the whole cafe had become quiet except for the horrible pop music over the speakers and Ellis's last comment. Everyone was waiting to see what happened next. Ellis looked around at the others in the cafe. The room was filled with moms, with toddlers, a few old men, and a table of teens who probably should have been in school somewhere. "Aw, save it for your Pilates class," he said to none of the women in particular. "Show's over." Then he turned to the waitress and finished by saying, "Fuck you," and headed for the door. The teenagers started to laugh as the stunned waitress bent down to pick up the pieces of the uneaten burger from the floor. The fry cook came out of the kitchen and approached Ellis as he reached for the door, his shirt covered in burger slop. Ellis turned toward the stocky man about his own age. "If you think I'm paying, you're out of your mind. Don't worry. You couldn't pay me enough to come back here. I'd rather eat a corn dog from the 7-Eleven. The fry cook stepped back, allowing Ellis to leave. "That's what I thought," he murmured under his breath as he stepped out onto the street. As busy as the cafe had been, the street was almost empty of people. A woman, his mother's age, was walking some small, puffball-shaped dog. A homeless guy was sleeping with his jacket over his face at the bus stop. Ellis walked in a determined way down the block and around the corner to where his old Buick was parked. The pinstripe down the driver's side now had a big scratch, and the side view mirror was hanging. To add insult to injury, there was a parking ticket on the windshield. The day just kept getting better. Ellis looked around him to see if anyone was watching or may have seen anything. There was no one. Disgusted, he spat on the ground, then with a single yank pulled the dangling mirror from the side of the car, tossing it on the passenger seat, as he got in. The car was far from new and not fancy, but it had been until today in good shape. He paid cash outright for it, and he didn't mind the gas mileage. He only used it around town. On the odd occasion he needed to drive out of town, he got a rental. Leaving his car in his driveway made it look like he was home and gave him a small sense of security. 2 years ago, his house had been robbed when he went out of town for a couple days for his brother's funeral. It seemed to be a pattern in his life, getting the short end of the stick. Ellis pulled the shirt from his body and dumped it in the trash as he entered the house. There was no way he was going to get the ketchup and mustard out now. His jeans would be okay. As he changed his clothes, he could see out of his bedroom window at the house next door. It had been vacant for the past 6 months while a landlord did a remodel after the last tenants had moved out and had trashed the place. Ellis had been more than happy to see them go. He was fairly sure the teenage son was the one responsible for the break-in 2 years earlier. Their landlord was the same as his. Joff owned a number of houses on the street. He told Ellis they found boxes of cell phones and credit cards and women's undergarments among the mess when they finally left, and there hadn't been any women living in the house. It had only been the elderly and disabled father, Jim, and his 16-year-old son, Junior. Everyone was sure Junior was behind all the chaos on the street, especially since things had calmed down once he was gone. As Ellis pulled the fresh shirt over his head, he was surprised to see a woman about his age in the house next door, and she was unpacking boxes. He pulled on a pair of gym shorts and tipped his blinds so he could continue to watch her without being seen. The house next door was the same as his, only the layout was reversed. He knew this because he had helped Jeff carry out the old refrigerator and stove and loaded them in his truck. So he knew he was watching this woman in her bedroom. She had all the windows open in the house. Ellis assumed it was because of the new paint fumes. He had watched the painters finish up just a few days before. Well, she'd learned for herself that leaving all her windows open, even when she was home, was not a good idea in their neighborhood. A light breeze blew between the houses and in the woman's window, and Ellis watched as she brushed the hair away from her face as she opened a new box. He watched as her placid face scrunched and tears formed in her eyes. Then she sat on something with her back to him. Ellis began to feel bad for his voyeurism and walked away from the window, allowing her the privacy she deserved. Ellis was still hungry. He had been denied his lunch. In his kitchen, he pulled a loaf of Wonder Bread, a package of bologna, and a bottle of mayo from the shelf. He used the entire package of bologna, each slice rolled into tubes, to make his sandwich and wrapped it in a length of paper towel. Mayo squeezed out of a corner and he licked it off as he took his lunch into the living room. He situated himself in his recliner and cracked the window, looking out onto the front street so he could listen to the sounds of the neighborhood as he ate. He had really been looking forward to that burger. It was his day off. He had planned on having lunch, then walking down to the record shop to thumb through some vinyl, but the cafe had turned him off. Now he finished his sandwich and nodded off, listening to the cars go up and down the street. Ellis woke with a start from his rest. It was dark and the room was cold. The paper towel that had been around his sandwich was on the floor next to the recliner. Two women's raised voices were floating in his open window. "No, I live here. It's my house." "I don't know who you are, but if you don't leave, I'm calling the police." "You don't belong here. Go back where you came from, bitch. You in my house." "You better stay away from me or..." "Or what? What you gonna do?" "You're gonna get hurt." Ellis couldn't take it anymore and looked out the window to see what was going on. The woman from next door was standing on her front porch confronting another woman Ellis recognized from the park on the corner. He didn't know where the woman lived per se, but he knew she worked with the park. She worked in the park, and that she could be belligerent. Ellis found his cell phone with his keys in the bowl next to his front door and dialed 911. "An officer has already been dispatched," the dispatcher informed him. "Well, they better get here soon. She's trying to push her into the house now, Ellis said before he hung up. His phone said it was 10:30. Just as his new neighbor was about to push the hooker down her front steps, a police car pulled up. Ellis watched as the hooker ran. One of the officers went after the hooker, and the other stayed with his new neighbor and looked like he was taking notes. After 10 minutes, the other officer returned with the hooker in handcuffs and stuffed her into the back of the patrol car. A couple other neighbors had come out to their front porches to see what was happening. Ellis went to the fridge and grabbed a couple beers. It was better than TV. Once he was halfway through his first beer, the police left. The other neighbors watching went in, and his new neighbor was left looking dumbfounded in the yellow light coming from the fixture on her front porch. Ellis looked at the unopened beer in his left hand, then back at the woman. He stuffed his big feet in a pair of flip-flops and walked out his door and up his new neighbor's steps. "Now what?" she said to him incredulously. "I'm your neighbor. Thought you might like a beer." Ellis extended his hand with the still cold, unopened beer toward the overwhelmed woman. She took it and used the corner of her T-shirt to help her twist off the cap. She took a sip and looked Ellis up and down skeptically. Ellis took a sip of his beer and looked back at her in much the same way. "I hate women," she said, surprising Ellis. Ellis laughed, a short, ironic kind of laugh, and sat down on the stoop. "Me too," he replied, as the woman sat down next to him, her hip touching his. That one is very, very, very informed by my time in Oakland. Very, very informed. There was a park that was down the street. There was a park that was down the street pretty much everywhere. There's a bunch of parks in Oakland, but the last place that we lived, there was a park that was down around the corner. It was probably about half a mile or so from the house. And there were a lot of working girls in that park. And I always felt bad. And a lot of those people walked up and down the street a lot. And other people that lived in the park, you know, some of those women, I don't think they were working with a pimp, but, you know, out of necessity to make money, right? Whenever they could. And it's like, you know, and there was a lot of drugs being dealt out there. I was always seeing handoff and stuff in front of that park, and then down around the corner from our house. A woman that lived behind us used to leave stuff out at the front corner, right? There was a house, the property that we were renting had a duplex that was also part of the parcel, and there were two people back there, and she used to leave stuff up there. It used to make me crazy because they'd come up around. It was like inviting people to come up around the house, and so then I had to start leaving stuff out, because if you didn't leave stuff out for people, then, you know, shit was getting stolen. I had our house was broken into there too. It was just, oh my God, and the cops did nothing. I had video footage of the guy trying to get into the house the one day. If I hadn't been home, we would have been cleaned out. I know it. They did nothing. Treated me like I was crazy. But for the women in particular, occasionally I would put out care packages, you know, pads and tampons and things like that. Herbal tea. I put out a period pack whenever I was having my period, and having a hard time. I thought about those women out there. Those women out there in the park. It wasn't just women. I put together care packages when I'd be out and about in town anyway, and frequently it was I had packets of herbal teas, different medicinal herbal teas, and vitamin supplements and stuff like that. Sometimes at the house I have a bunch of candies in there, because I know like a lot of people were detoxing and they'd be coming down off of meth or coke or whatever it was that they were doing. And you have a sugar. There's like a sugar craving. So sometimes I put candies in with it, and then I put in teas that help with detox, liver and kidney cleansing teas. And sometimes I had rosaries in those packs, and sometimes chapstick and hand sanitizer, wet naps, that kind of stuff. But the interactions, oh my gosh, living in that city was a trauma. It totally was. Every day, it was a trauma. Every goddamn day, living in that city was a trauma. Every day. And then talking to my family, they're always like, why are you angry? Why are you upset? I don't understand what's going on. He's like, no, you don't understand my life at all. I'm never good enough. I'm never good enough for any of them. I don't even know if my mom's still alive. I don't know. She told me after my grandmother died that I would never know. I really don't know why she hates me so badly. I don't know. I never have. Anyway, I think Omar's done cleaning up the chickens. I hope you like the story.